Someone who's made us laugh on several occasions, whether through his wacky behavior, even just a clever phrase, is Steve Martin. And while he's very funny, he can often tap into the more serious sides of his characters as they navigate through life. I'm going to count down my favorite performances of his that provide both plenty of laughs and also something to think about. Starting with George Banks in Father the Bride. A lot of the humor in this movie comes from George's befuddlement and how much is being spent on his daughter's wedding, and Martin certainly finds the right angle to depict that, showing times when he's reasonable, other points when he takes his frustrations a little too far. However, through it all, we see someone not quite ready for his daughter he has known since she was a baby to take the next step in her life. We also see his quick thinking skills as he tries to solve the problems that arise. Of course, what makes Father the Bride an enjoyable movie is the comedy, with a scene where he rants about hot dog buns serving as one of the highlights. Because George is right, the number of buns should be equal to the number of hot dogs. The sequel also gave Martin a lot of opportunities to dig into George's worries with his wife and daughter getting pregnant. The Father the Bride films are examples of how Martin can find the humor in ordinary, everyday things and show a character getting frustrated by certain little details that come from them. Freddie Benson in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Playing a small-time con man, Steve Martin shows the desperate lengths Freddie goes to con people and often to humorous effect. We see him put on all sorts of disguises and characters along with showing his conniving side and the times when Freddie gets fooled. Michael Caine proves to be a solid match for him as we see them both work together and attempt to outwit the other. Caine's more sophisticated con artist, going up against Martin's less restrained scoundrel, provides plenty of chances for funny gags to materialize. It's surprising they never appear to work together again after Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, because their polar opposite acting styles made them well suited to each other. Martin also shares some really good scenes with Glenn Headley as the woman he and Caine are trying to con, and we see how their relationship evolves during the story. This is the kind of role that allowed him to tap into the many facets of his character and bounce from resourceful to silly. Rigby Riordan in Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. This is such a clever comedy as it takes a bunch of classic film noirs and then splices the clips into this new story to make it seem like Steve Martin is actually interacting with the likes of Humphrey Bogart and Bette Davis. And part of what sells it is Martin. He has clearly studied these movies and gives a performance that allows him to fit naturally with the edited clips. There are parts where he plays Rigby completely straight, and at other moments he gets a little silly while still keeping in line with the movie's gimmick. There's several great bits throughout the movie, like him pouring a seemingly endless supply of coffee mix, and when he stands in for Barbara Stanwyck in the double indemnity scenes. Martin also makes sure his performance is a loving homage to these films and their stars, instead of being a mockery of them, and his narration is also appropriately delivered throughout the movie. He truly makes you believe that he's acting off these legends, even when it gets goofy. The insolent waiter in The Muppet Movie. Even though Martin is not in the film for very long, he's able to make his waiter into a hilarious and unforgettable presence. Like I said when I reviewed The Muppet Movie on Vaulting, this is my favorite celebrity cameo in the movie. He plays the part with the right level of irritation of this frog and pig who are completely oblivious to the attitude he is giving them. All the gestures he does, both little and broad, are so expertly timed, and he manages to quickly give us an idea of this waiter's personality. Now, he clearly does not like to serve anyone. Of course, he'd previously appeared on The Muppet Show before, so already had experience acting alongside Jim Henson's creations. And in many ways, Steve Martin is almost like a human Muppet himself, of how he moves around and acts in all sorts of wild and crazy ways. The Muppet Movie was my introduction to Steve Martin, and even though my attention was mostly on Kermit and Miss Piggy in this scene, I'm sure this oddball waiter also made me laugh, and was a great way to first see this talented comedian. Bobby Bowfinger in Bowfinger. While Eddie Murphy obviously gets the showrunner roles here, Martin also gets a lot of funny moments with his B-movie director trying desperately to make a science fiction film. What's great is that even though the character could have turned out really sleazy and unlikable, Martin avoids going that route, and you kind of hope his crazy scheme where he tries to put this big star in his little movie works out. Bowfinger is just someone passionate about filmmaking and making sure he gets the opportunity to prove his abilities. All the times where he has to concoct something elaborate are very funny, like when he tries to make a pitch to a major studio executive in a restaurant. It should be known that Steve Martin also wrote the screenplay for Bowfinger and completely understood the character he had created for himself to play. He believes in the wild things he does to get Kit Ramsey in his movie or having Jif run across the road, and Martin absolutely sells it. Arthur Parker in Pennies from Heaven. While at first glance this seems like a lighthearted musical, this is really quite a sad movie and somewhat different from Steve Martin's usual roles. However, he does an exceptional job of playing this character who exists in his own fantasy world. Arthur is also not exactly a great person, which we see through the way he treats his wife and tries to get together with this schoolteacher. He is heavily flawed, and Martin manages to pick those aspects of Arthur's personality, yet he helps make one interested in his story and the darker places he eventually goes down. He has a lot of great scenes opposite Jessica Harper and Burnett Peters that delve further into Arthur and his treatment of others. When he launches into the musical numbers, Martin brings the needed energy as he lip syncs to many of these classic tunes. Pennies from Heaven proved he absolutely had the dramatic chops to play these kinds of roles, even when the characters had a lot of undesirable traits. Orin Scallo DDS in Little Shop of Horrors, a character that allowed Steve Martin to go truly nuts. This is a completely outlandish person, a movie full of outlandish personalities, and he launches into it with gutso. As a villain, Orin is absolutely despicable, making it somewhat understandable why Seymour would want to feed him to a man-eating plant. Martin does not shy away from Orin's horrible treatment of Audrey, and makes sure not to treat that aspect of the character as a joke. Instead, the main joke is how he delights in being a dentist that makes people uncomfortable in the chair. The highlight is his big musical number where he goes around his office and sings about drilling into people's mouths and doing other painful things to his patients. The moments he shares opposite Bill Murray as a patient who actually enjoys getting hurt also provide the laughs, along with the scenes with Rick Moranis as Seymour. And then there's the time he gets a little too high on laughing gas. Even with the small amount of screen time he has in Little Shop of Horrors, Martin absolutely makes the most of it. Charles Hayden Savage in Only Murders in the Building. One of the highlights of the past few years has been the annual release of a new season of this hilarious murder mystery show. Co-created by Martin and centered on two senior citizens and a young woman who start a true crime podcast as bodies drop around them, I've loved watching these characters get into scrapes and solve mysteries together. The idea of Charles being someone who once starred in a detective show in the 80s provides all kinds of humorous moments, although what really sells the show are his interactions with Martin Short and Selena Gomez. They play off each other so well, and it's been great seeing their relationship evolve over the 4 seasons released so far. The 3rd season is when Martin gets the most moments to shine, as Charles stars in a Broadway musical. His big musical number is a delightful patter that Martin performs perfectly. The physical comedy scenes also show how Martin can do so much with his body movement. However, it's not just the comedic moments where he excels, as Charles' sadder scenes also showcase Martin's versatility. Only Murders in the Building is a wonderful series, and it's been great watching Martin be allowed to do all kinds of things on it. Gil Buckman in Parenthood. This is a role that required Martin to slip naturally between comedy and drama. The comedic scenes are very funny, like when we see him try to entertain children at his son's birthday party when the original act does not show up. However, what makes this performance so special is when he depicts the difficulties that can come from being a parent and how that fits into the entire family, not just the ones living under his roof. We see him have his frustrations of his boss and trying to meet his father's expectations, and Martin does really well in those scenes. He makes Gil somewhat sympathetic as he deals with problems, but he makes his occasional mistakes too, and he has some particularly good scenes with Mary Steenburgen as his wife and Jason Robards as his father. When you look at the poster, you get the impression that Parenthood is a silly comedy about the wacky shenanigans of raising children. However, it's about a lot more than that, as it has fully realized characters going through serious arcs, and Martin gets one of the best storylines. And my #1 favorite Steve Martin performance is Neil Page in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. His role in this holiday classic captures so many of the best elements we associate with Steve Martin, while still feeling unique to this character and his experiences. He can be frustrated a lot of the time, but also show Neil's attempts to be helpful, as well as his sadder, more thoughtful moments. A lot of the humor comes from him trying desperately to return home to his family, only for something to go wrong that sets him back. My favorite scene is when he gets annoyed at his rental car not being at the place it was promised, and he gives an F-bomb-laden rant to the car rental clerk. You definitely feel somewhat sympathetic even when we're laughing, although Martin also depicts the parts where he goes too far. Of course, there are also the several scenes he shares opposite John Candy, and they make a fantastic pair. Even though Neil is frequently annoyed with Del, their growing friendship is nonetheless believable. There's so many memorable moments in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles as he goes on this journey, and Steve Martin becomes a major reason why they prove so funny. Now let me know in the comments what your favorite Steve Martin performances are, and I'll see you next time.